Please be aware, in this podcast series we talk about all areas of safeguarding, which some people may find upsetting. So please make sure you're okay listening to today's topic. Be mindful of those around you, such as children, that you might not want to listen in. Hi, I'm SSS Safeguarding Director Sam Preston.
And I'm former head teacher and content author Sara Spinks.
Welcome to today's podcast, where we're diving into a pressing issue, that's navigating speech and language challenges for children following the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has really exacerbated speech and language difficulties for many children across the UK, and NHS waiting lists for speech and language therapy they've grown significantly. So today I thought we could just have a little bit of a look at that. And Sarah, maybe you could start by giving us an overview of the current situation.
Yeah, absolutely, Sam. You know, the disruptions caused by the pandemic have intensified those existing challenges in our speech and language support systems. NHS figures, they show that there are over 65,000 children in England, 6,500 in Scotland, 2,300 in Wales and 4,500 in Northern Ireland waiting for speech and language therapy. And this surge is on top of a system that was already struggling before the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, those numbers are absolutely staggering, aren't they? I mean, you're absolutely right to point out this was an area where the services were actually struggling to meet the need before the pandemic. But I mean, oh wow, those numbers, as I say, staggering. So what's the consequences of these delays? Because obviously going to be a huge delay before a child can get support. So what are we looking at consequence-wise?
Well, I think the consequences, they're really far-reaching. Delayed speech development impacts more than just language proficiency. Yeah. Health visitor checks in England for the academic year of 22-23, they revealed that nearly 15% of children aged 24 to 30 months had communication skills well below the expected levels. And that's up from 11% in 2018. And this can hinder that academic progress and inflict emotional distress, especially on children with speech difficulties.
Absolutely. I mean, that's really alarming, isn't it? So you've kind of touched on it. Let's look at the impact on children's academic attainment as they grow older. How is it impacting that?
Well, by the age of 5, children with speech and language difficulties face significant hurdles, and they are 6 times less likely to meet expected targets in English and 11 times less likely to achieve benchmarks in maths by the end of primary school. And the long-term impact of these delays is severe, underlining that sort of crucial need for early intervention to mitigate these effects on educational outcomes.
It's just so shocking, isn't it? And in addition to that, there's also that connection between speech difficulties and emotional or behavioural disorders. So can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a really strong correlation. Research indicates that 8 out of 10 children with emotional and behavioural disorders have an underlying speech, language and communication need that's often unidentified. And I think this highlights that interconnectedness of linguistic development and emotional well-being. And it highlights that need really for a comprehensive assessments and interventions to be put in place.
Absolutely. To me, it just seems so obvious if a child hasn't got that body of language to express themselves, there's going to be so much that's just misinterpreted as well as frustration. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So navigating these challenges, it must be incredibly tough for families, and especially during the pandemic when we've had all the restrictions. So what were some of the difficulties really that they faced?
Well, I think families have faced formidable challenges, particularly due to pandemic-induced isolation.
Yeah.
And children have been unable to communicate effectively. Often, that often manifests itself in distress in various ways. That lack of immediate support has made it even more crucial for early intervention. So many families have found themselves on waiting lists, dealing with that uncertainty of when help will arrive. And that must be, really difficult as a family.
Absolutely. But despite these challenges, there are success stories, right? Maybe you could share some examples of positive outcomes.
Yeah, I think there are rays of hope. For instance, children with speech dyspraxia, which is a motor speech disorder, they are making incredible progress with proper support. Speech therapies not only improves that language proficiency, but it also builds confidence and it fosters those social connections which are crucial, and it empowers then children to sort of excel academically and socially. And there are instances of that are reported up and down the country.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's good to hear that there are success stories, but we can't shy away, can we, from this enormous service gap that we have here. I mean, what measures is central government taking to address these challenges?
Well, the government, I think they're actively exploring various avenues to enhance early identification and support for children with speech and language challenges. The Department for Education has acknowledged that the pandemic's impact on education. They've totally acknowledged that. And they've made nearly £5 billion available for education recovery. So initiatives like the Early Language and Support for Every Child project that aims to screen primary school children is coming into play. And that hopefully will improve their speech and language skills.
Well, I'm going to ask you a little bit more about that in a minute, but I just can't I've got to comment, me. The DFE have made £5 billion available for education recovery, but that's education recovery as a total. Yeah. So I think, we can't lose sight that specialist support for speech and language sits within that alongside a lot of other things.
Definitely.
So it really dilutes that amount of money, doesn't it? But
absolutely.
So the Early Language and Support project for Every Child, how does that work?
Well, this project was launched as a joint effort between NHS England and the DFE, and it focuses primarily on early years and those primary school settings. And it involves screening over 500,000 primary school children. And it has helped over 160,000 children in reception classes to improve their speech and language skills over 3 years. And I think by prioritising that early identification and intervention, the project does offer a sort of beacon of hope for children facing speech challenges. I mean, definitely in my headship, we were part of a project like this, and it did make a big difference to those identified children. My concern is those that aren't identified initially. I think there's an issue there.
I agree with you. And having been in practice for an incredibly long time, when I think back to the screening that used to happen for children as soon as they hit 5, and the screening the general screening that happened for all children, where they looked at sight and hearing and cognition, and they were very basic, low-level first kind of assessments. But they were very good at picking up these things very, very early. And we know the sooner that we can provide that support, the easier it is to actually get that change. Once something's embedded, it's a lot harder. And so I think the health screening of children, really, I think that's something that really needs to be looked at. But this project, that sounds really promising. So we're obviously in this situation where there's not enough services and there's long delays where you're on waiting lists. What can educators and parents do? What can they do to support children who have speech and language difficulties during this recovery phase?
Well, I think educators and parents, they play or can play that really pivotal role by being vigilant and proactive. They should work closely with speech and language therapists, utilise available resources and create those supportive environments that encourage communication. And schools, they can integrate language development activities into daily routines. I mean, certainly we did. And parents can then be supported by school and learn through school and engage in those activities to promote those language skills at home as well. So I think there's an element around that partnership work between educators and parents to hopefully address things and be quite direct with it.
Yeah. So it's just about what do you put in place to empower that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think whilst the pandemic has certainly intensified challenges for children with speech and language difficulties, we are seeing concerted efforts to try and address these issues. The resilience and determination of children, coupled with targeted support and intervention, I mean, that can lead to really transformative outcomes. We know that from practice. What's clear, though, is the crucial need to continue to prioritise that early intervention. That's the big one for me. And we've got to look at providing that necessary support to help every child flourish.